police museums all over Europe, there are items of evidence that have brought some of the world's worst criminals to justice. Behind every object in these crime museums is a fascinating and sometimes macabre story.
The key facts of a crime are known collectively by the Latin term, the corpus delicti, or the body of the crime. Where murder is suspected, certain questions must be answered. Has a death occurred? Is a dead person's identity proven? And is the death a result of violence? The term corpus delicti has sometimes been mistaken, often by murderers, as meaning the body of the victim. But there's more to a murder investigation than a corpse.
Our first case made legal history because it was the first time a British defendant was found guilty of murder without a body ever being found. The available evidence made up the body of the crime and resulted in a verdict that still raises questions more than 50 years later. A tale of sex and violence on the high seas. The story began on the morning of the 18th of October 1947 on a passenger liner, the SS Durban Castle, which was on its way from South Africa to London. At 7:30 that morning, a stewardess knocked on the door of cabin 126. Unexpectedly, the door was unlocked, but the occupant, 21-year-old actress Gay Gibson, was nowhere to be seen. The stewardess noticed that the porthole was open, but saw nothing unusual in the cabin. Assuming Miss Gibson was in the bathroom, she tidied the room and left. 2 hours later, with still no sign of Miss Gibson, a call was put out. No one had seen her. Could she have fallen overboard? The ship was turned back, though in shark-infested waters, the chances of her being found alive were slim.
Then Frederick Steer, one of the night watchmen, came forward. He had a piece of information that set in motion one of the most sensational murder cases of its day. He described how, just before 3 o'clock that morning, he'd answered a call from cabin 126.
Unusually, both the steward and stewardess lights had been illuminated. When there was no reply to his knock, he tried the handle. He felt it held tightly from the other side. A man's face loomed for a moment.
It's all right.
Before the door was slammed shut. He recognised the face immediately. It was deck steward, James Cam. Although married with a young daughter, James Cam had a reputation as a womaniser and enjoyed to the full the forbidden shipboard liaisons that frequently came his way. The captain began to piece together the events of the previous night. Gay Gibson had dined with fellow first-class passengers before enjoying some dancing. At one point during the evening, she was seen briefly with the steward, James Cam.
I've got a bone to pick with you.
Between 12 and 1 o'clock, the boatswain's mate saw her alone on the deck, still in her evening gown. At some point, she returned to cabin 126 and was never seen again. Cam was questioned by the ship's captain. He admitted talking to Miss Gibson the previous night, but said that at no time had he entered her cabin. The ship's surgeon examined Cam and found scratches on his shoulders and wrists. Marks, he explained, had been caused by scratching a heat rash. Although Cam was allowed to continue with his duties, when the ship reached England, the police were waiting for him.
Again, Cam repeated his earlier statement, but eventually, when confronted with the fact that he'd been clearly seen in the missing girl's cabin on the night she disappeared, he changed his story.
He now said that he'd gone to Miss Gibson's cabin by arrangement. She'd been wearing only a dressing gown. During their subsequent lovemaking, she suddenly became breathless, then gone limp. There was a faint line of bubbles just on the edges of the lips. It appeared to be blood-flecked. Cam described how he had tried artificial respiration, but when this failed, he panicked and pushed a young woman out of the porthole. James Cam was charged with the willful murder of Gay Gibson. His defence team engaged Dennis Hocking, a forensic pathologist. Their task would be as complicated as the prosecution's, to create a convincing case without a body. The police removed the cabin door from its hinges, as well as the bed linen and the bell push. The prosecution focused on the bells. These were pushed in cabin 126 just before 3 o'clock in the morning. They asserted that Gay Gibson was not a willing sexual partner, but rather was fighting off a violent sexual attack. In desperation, they said, she had rung the bells before Cam strangled or smothered her, then heaved her through the porthole. Examination of the door revealed the outline of the palm of his right hand, a mark consistent with someone pushing violently from the inside.
Cam said that he was only fairly certain that Gay had been dead when he had pushed her through the porthole. The unspoken fear that she might have been alive hung over the court proceedings.
But it was the bed linen that chiefly occupied both defence and prosecution.
Hocking had found dried urine on the top sheet, and he and Donald Tier, who appeared for the prosecution and with whom I worked for some 10 years, both agreed that Miss Gibson could have passed this as a terminal act at her death. It can occur, as they agreed, in both natural death and strangulation, but the fact that it can occur quite often in strangulation made a deep effect on the court.
In the press and in the court, Gay's character came under intense scrutiny. Her mother, Daisy, testified that her daughter was a naive virgin, but the evidence of a South African doctor Gay had visited because she feared she might have been pregnant, and a contraceptive device found in the young actress's luggage contradicted this view. Gay's missing black silk pyjamas were focused on. The prosecution stated that, as they were missing, she must have been wearing them, and was not, as Cam had stated, naked beneath her dressing gown. This implied that she wasn't inviting his advances, and was indeed the victim of rape and murder. It was well known that Gay suffered from asthma, and the defence, in an effort to show that she had died of natural causes, brought over several witnesses from South Africa. They described occasions when she had fainted, her persistent cough, and her complaints of shooting pains in her arms. The defence also pointed out that the cabin showed no sign of a violent struggle.
When the judge, Mr. Justice Hilbery, gave his summing up, he saved his most dramatic moment for the issue of the scratches that were found on Cam just after Gay Gibson had gone missing. Splendid in his crimson robe, he put his right hand to his throat and made clawing movements across the wrist with his bent fingers of his left hand, impressing on the jurors the image of a victim struggling to escape her attacker.
Cam's defence had opened with the caution to the jury that they were there to decide whether Cam had committed murder, not whether he was thought to have pushed Gay's body out of the porthole. But that action, and his statement that he was fairly certain that she had been dead at the time, had more significance than all the medical evidence. James Cam was sentenced to death.
But he escaped execution as Parliament was debating capital punishment and had voted in a 5-year suspension of the death penalty.
Dennis Hocking had done a lot of work on this case, and he believed Cam's description. I'm inclined to do so as well, as Cam would have had no medical knowledge, and I believe this is a case of sudden death during sexual intercourse. It's a particularly interesting medico-legal case, because I do not see how a pathologist could have appeared satisfactorily for the defence or the prosecution, as he would not be able to give an opinion without a body.
The conviction of James Cam without a body being found placed him in the legal history books. But will we ever know why, or even how he pushed Gay Gibson through that porthole? The absence of a body in a murder case means that the most basic of questions can't easily be answered. If you can't prove that a person has been killed, how can you convict the man or the woman suspected of murder?
Our next case had to deal head-on with just this dilemma. It was an investigation that involved thousands of hours of police manpower and several cloak and dagger undercover operations. On Monday, the 29th of December 1969, Alec Mackay, the deputy chairman of the News of the World newspaper, returned to his home in Wimbledon, South London. The Mackays had recently suffered a burglary, and because of this, Mrs. Mackay always kept the front door locked with the chain on. But Alec Mackay received no answer to his specially coded ring. To his surprise, he found the door unlocked. His wife's glasses lay on the floor. The telephone lead had been wrenched from the wall. Her handbag lay open, its contents strewn up the stairs. Next to some elastoplast and twine lay a billhook. Thinking that he may have interrupted an intruder, he picked up the billhook and searched the house. He soon realised he was alone. Something was seriously wrong. Wherever she had gone, she had left in a hurry. He ran next door and called the police.
Initially, the police kept an open mind about Muriel Mackay's disappearance. Men and women of middle age not infrequently leave their lives and stage quite dramatic scenarios to cover their disappearance. That evening, a detective sat with Alec Mackay and talked to him about his marriage and asked him if there were any reasons why his wife might have left home of her own accord.
But Mr. Mackay, and by now his family, who had been alerted to the situation, knew no reason why Muriel would have left, and apart from the jewellery, all her other possessions were untouched. It it was unlikely that a woman who loved clothes wouldn't have taken at least a few favourite things with her. By midnight, the house was surrounded by reporters, hoping to expand the rumour that the wife of a newspaper boss had been abducted. Then at 1:15 in the morning, things took a dramatic turn. A phone call came through from a man calling himself M3
Who's
and
that?
claiming he was part of the English mafia.
Who?
He said, "We have your wife. It will cost you £1 million." He then said that they tried to get a wife from newspaper tycoon Rupert Murdoch, Alec Mackay's friend and boss. But even after realising their mistake, they'd still taken Muriel Mackay. Wimbledon CID were now involved in Britain's first ever major kidnapping case. DCS Wilfred Smith headed a team of 50 officers. John Miners was detective inspector on the case.
Now, when I arrived at Arthur Road that first night, of course, Mr. Mackay was in a very agitated state. They were all very upset, all of them. We realised that we've got something pretty solid on our hands.
Next morning, the kidnapping was front-page news.
His telephone, I might tell you, was absolutely chock-a-block. Everybody phoning up, what's it about? You know, all friends were there and all the rest of it. And I think M3 had a job getting through.
Eventually, late that afternoon, M3 did get through, saying that the family would soon be getting a letter. The police were unable to trace the call. The next morning, the post brought a letter. The handwriting was Muriel's. It made chilling reading. "Darling Alec, I'm deteriorating in health. Please cooperate."
The scrawly writing was all over the page, obviously written when she was blindfolded, but obviously this had been dictated to her. Please don't tell the police. Do what they want. Give them the money.
The letter was made public in the next day's newspapers. New Year's Day 1970. That day, the family received another phone call demanding the ransom money. But after that, there was silence. In desperation, the family contacted a clairvoyant who spoke of a white farm and a green barn. He put the location as north-northeast out of London. His vision would turn out to be fairly accurate. Days went by with still no word from M3. The family refused to give up hope, but privately, the police were becoming pessimistic.
We knew from about the third or fourth day that she was dead. We all agreed that the letters were all written on that first day. Mrs. Mackay suffered very badly from arthritis, and without her pills she would have been in terrible pain after the first 2 or 3 days.
Towards the end of January, more letters and Muriel's handwriting arrived. One contained shreds of clothing she'd been wearing when she disappeared. There was even a piece of her shoe leather. A letter from M3 outlined the plan for the payment of the ransom money.
They said, we want Mr. Mackay to come in the Rolls Royce with the chauffeur and to bring the money, the £1 million. It was decided that I would dress up as a chauffeur, and we were told to go to a phone box in North London.
Here a call instructed them to drive to a second phone box. Lying on the floor was a cigarette packet with more directions. These took 2 detectives to a junction near a village called Dane End. Here the instructions said they would find a spot marked by 2 paper flowers.
We were to put the money in the case on the top of this bank, then go back to our original telephone box and wait there, and we'd be told where Mrs. Mackay was, and we could pick her up.
The whole area was in fact under police observation. One of the many cars that passed the scene was a dark Volvo, which paused before driving off. The suitcase wasn't collected.
It was really chaos. It really was. The whole operation was in the papers the following day. It left a very nasty taste, that first one, and didn't help us, or the family either. A phone call from the kidnappers made it clear they'd seen the police at the ransom drop. They would allow just one more attempt for the money to be handed over by Alec Mackay and his daughter Diane. It was still felt far too risky for the family to participate, and John Miners was called upon to impersonate Alec Mackay, with a woman officer taking the place of Diane. I had to shave my moustache off because he was clean-shaven, which was terrible for me because I hadn't lost my moustache all my life. Anyway, I shaved my moustache off, and my wife made me up in our bedroom at home.
An armed detective hidden in the boot of the Rolls with a supply of oxygen and water accompanied them. This second ransom drop followed much the same pattern as the first. Instructions received in phone boxes led them via a short train journey and a taxi ride to a garage selling used cars. And next to a particular vehicle, they left the money. A Volvo drove up to the suitcases several times. Inside the car were two dark-skinned men. Before the car could attempt a fourth approach, an elderly couple, who had noticed the suspicious cases, picked them up and took them to the local police station.
But the police were already tracing the Volvo car, and the next day detectives drove to a lonely farm not far from Bishop Stortford, named Rook's Farm.
Rook's Farm was owned by Arthur Hussain, a 33-year-old West Indian. Staying with him was his younger brother, Nizamuddin. Detectives identified them as the men in the Volvo.
When we got there, the Volvo was sitting outside the farmhouse. We found paper flowers in the house and 2 paper flowers in the Volvo, which is the same as the paper flowers I found on the place where we left the ransom on the first occasion.
A blank piece of paper in Nizamuddin's bedroom showed impressions from a note sent by the kidnappers to Alec Mackay. In the pocket of his trousers was a piece of paper with the registration number of the vehicle at the second ransom drop.
So we charged them with murder and with kidnapping. Arthur Hussain was a very dominant personality. No doubt about it. Gregarious, really. He used to go in the local pubs and drink scotch and talk to the other people and tell them how rich he was. Nizamuddin, very dour, sulky, sullen, really wouldn't answer any questions at all. Ask Arthur, that's all he would say. The number of telephone calls I got from my compatriots from very high up in the Metropolitan Police were saying, well, have you got a body, you know? You've got no chance, John, without a body, you've got no chance of getting him down. But there were 31 circumstantial evidence pieces against them.
Every inch of Rook's Farm was searched, with dust, fibres, hair and soil being sent for analysis. More than 200 policemen took part in the search, extending beyond the farm and into Epping Forest and local villages. No trace of Muriel Mackay was found. At their trial, both men pleaded not guilty. Early on in the proceedings, the younger brother made an admission through his counsel. He admitted placing the paper flowers at the first ransom rendezvous and driving the Volvo. Arthur made no such admissions, but there was plenty of evidence to link him directly to the crime. His fingerprints were found at the Mackay house, on the ransom notes and on the cigarette packet used during the ransom drop.
Also at the Old Bailey on the second or third day, one of the two counsel said, well, it's reputed all round Stocking-Pelham that Mrs. Mackay was fed to the pigs on the farm at Stocking-Pelham, you see. And, of course, the newspapers the following day were just full. Mrs. Mackay fed to the pigs.
Though the evidence against the brothers was strong, the absence of a body and their refusal to reveal anything about Mrs. Mackay meant that the truth could never fully be known. The brothers were found guilty with a recommendation for leniency for Nizamuddin. He was given 15 years, Arthur 25. They received separate sentences for blackmail and sending threatening letters. The judge spoke of their actions as cold-blooded and abominable. The family, who had been through so much, would never know exactly what happened to their loved one. And decades later, that final piece of the jigsaw is still missing.
However great the body of evidence, or the corpus delicti, with no actual body, there's an emptiness at the heart of a murder investigation. Gay Gibson perhaps eaten by sharks, Muriel Mackay perhaps eaten by pigs. Two enduring mysteries.